Thank you again.
All right, so tell me a little bit about your journey in the disability community. How did that come about?
It came about in many ways, as usually it generally does for lots of us who get involved in a professional level. It comes from a personal experience. So I myself am neurodivergent. I experienced ADHD in addition to a lot of the comorbidities associated with anxiety and depression. And so, I navigated that, in my earlier life, and then I wasn't diagnosed formally until adulthood. So I went through those experiences in my own life. But then when my daughter was born, I had the opportunity to also advocate on her behalf. She was diagnosed with autism at the age of 4. And as a girl diagnosed with autism, she presents and manifests in a way that is different than what folks like to call the stereotypical male presentation. And then being high functioning, there's also a lot of nuance there. So, and then also advocating on behalf of my ex-husband, who was injured in Iraq, suffered from TBI, post-traumatic epilepsy, advocating on his behalf, but also trying to navigate life as a neurodivergent individual, advocating for my family members to get them the services and supports they needed, but also navigating family life in that context brought me into this realm.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. So, like, what's some of the work that you do in the disability community? Because I know that you're involved in like a caregiving organization. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. Oh, I mean, and I'm all over the place, right? So, you know, this whole journey began as an individual, as a mom, a wife, trying to get services for my family. And I found that I was coming up against every single, block in the system. And it wasn't just one system, it was the federal, it was the state, it was the local, it was the insurance, it was the school systems. And I was finding myself coming up against these blockades at every turn. And at some point, I just said, enough with this. Like, I cannot imagine other families are having to deal with this as well. Enough is enough. So I ended up pursuing a master's degree in social work with a specialization in military social work and macro systems practice, meaning that while I can do, micro or one-on-one therapy, my area of expertise is in systems level interventions. So I want to address the policy, the programmatic, all of the things that happen on these large scale levels to support population health, right? So that brought me into a lot of unique opportunities, the first of which being I ended up working over at the Elizabeth Bell Foundation as the HHCC, Hidden Heroes Caregiver Coordinator, um, managing their online caregiver community. And shortly thereafter, I moved on over to Psych Armor, which is another nonprofit organization where I was able to collaborate and create caregiver education specifically for military caregivers to help support them in their journey. And then this all brought me into, several unique opportunities where I was able to also become an advocate for autism families within the military through Mission Alpha Advocacy, supporting policy recommendations on the federal side to support EFM or EFMP, the Exceptional Family Member Program. There we go. Um, and ensuring that those within active duty families were also getting the supports they needed, as well as those families who were also on the veteran side, ensuring that they had services and supports. And then all of this kind of organically brought me toward the tech sector, where I'm now at caregiving.com, which was quite the leap going from a bunch of .orgs to a .com. But it offered me the opportunity to be able to expand my practice to support a broader range of caregivers supporting the diverse needs of multiple populations and to kind of eliminate the silos that exist in granting and gaining access and supports to caregivers for all needs. And so that's ultimately where I've landed. And it's been an incredible experience because, we're finding how do we address these large scale issues, and technology is becoming the answer because we're able to supplement, a lot of the individual services and on the ground supports with wraparound services that can ensure that there really are no gaps in support. And
Mm-hmm.
to also address, that connection factor. Being a caregiver myself several times over, isolation and, the mental health, the adverse effects on mental health that come along with it really affected me and my wellness. And so being able to also validate other caregivers in their experience and let them know that they're not alone and that it's okay to not be okay. It's been an incredible experience to be able to really expand my practice to really address everyone rather than these pocket populations.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. So like what does caregiving.com, now that we're on the subject, what who does it is it mostly about like the caregivers themselves, like giving them
Yeah,
resources? What's that all about?
it truly is about the caregiver. But it's also more than that because the wellness and the efficacy and the sustainability of the caregiver is closely tied to the outcome of the care recipient, right? And also, there's really no one stop shop, no one place to go where caregivers can seek out validated information that they can rely on. Research has shown that primarily folks will look on the internet, they'll ask their friends, and then, their tertiary, resource is generally their provider. And unfortunately, providers are not in a position where they can really dedicate time to training, educating, or informing caregivers. Uh, you know, mo- Mostly caregivers leave an appointment where a diagnosis has been made or they've been informed that their loved one may have a diagnosis with a printout with general information regarding the diagnosis. And that leaves a lot of questions, but also there's a lot of nuance involved with, okay, now you have the diagnosis, now what? And so this is an effort to give them the information they need so that they can best support their loved ones and to give them, as best outcomes as possible to ensure that they are empowering their loved one, to ensure that they are also connected with a community that understands and can validate their experiences, but also just tangible training opportunities, because caregivers also don't have access to consistent respite or support for those who may need those services. We're experiencing a national crisis with care workers, and so that leaves caregivers in a spot where they may not have somebody who can come in and help them or take care of their loved one so that they can go either take care of themselves or learn how to best take care of their loved one, right? So that's again where the tech side comes in, where, okay, if the caregiver cannot leave the home because they don't have access to the care support they need, how can we get them the training and information they need to provide the best care possible, to improve the outcomes for their loved one, to understand what comes next in their journey, but also how can they best take care of themselves even when the resources are limited? I know that's a lot, but it truly is a mixed bag because there's so much to it and it's such a complex issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my next question, although I don't have it written down here, is what can be done to solve, the caregiving crisis? Because you lay out a lot of problems in for people with disabilities. Often, they don't have the resources to get caregiving support services. So what
Yeah.
can be done, like state, federal level? I mean, because it depends on the state, on every state. So what's
Yeah. We need to have a consistent and reliable, policy layout and oversight. We need it to be reinforced. There's been a lot of great work that has been done by several organizations, and I can't think of them off the top of my head because it is a Monday morning, and I'm only running on one cup of coffee. So maybe after coffee number three, I would remember my acronyms and be able to cite them accordingly. But um, it's truly, there have been a lot of organizations that have come out with great recommendations for policy, for cross-sector collaboration, to really create this village of sorts between the different sectors, to bring all of their best features together to create a resource or to create supports that can fill the gap, right? And there have been some great recommendations in those cross-sector collaborations and bringing, the health systems together with community-based organizations. And then how do we integrate technology into this to be able to best incorporate all of these complex systems, but also how do we measure success and progress? And how do we ensure that it's consistent? And unfortunately, there's been a breakdown, and to your point, in that state by state playbook, right? Because not every state is on the same page with this. And so there's some states that are trying to work toward getting, these kinds of systems put together, but it's inconsistent and unreliable. And so I think it truly leans toward the federal to reinforce these regulations, these policies, and expectations for insurers and health systems and providers and all of the other, organizations in between, and then provide oversight to ensure compliance, to make sure that things are being rolled out in the way that they should be, and to ensure that the end consumer, i.e., those who are receiving care, those who are, experiencing a condition, are getting the support that they need and that's meaningful, that it's
Mhm.
not just checking a box. I could have said that a lot more eloquently, but Monday
Yeah, yeah,
morning,
no,
that's the
makes
best I could
yeah,
do.
makes total sense. Um, yeah, so like I know I should have asked this, but like um what 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 sort of testimonials have you heard from caregivers, in that regard? Because um like what do because I think from like having caregiving and like going through the whole thing. I know I'm kind of rambling a bit, but yeah, what have you heard from caregivers, who have gone through this process of like figuring out how to like care for their loved one or family member or yeah.
It's frustrating and it is discombobulating. It's scary. Um, and it really, it really ties back into the inconsistencies and lack of connection between the various systems that do not necessarily play well together, and make the process of trying to figure out how to navigate these systems almost impossible. So frequently, caregivers, including myself, were often overwhelmed with the complexities associated with the systems. Just trying to understand them, to know what they need to do next, how to get the services that are available to them, even outside of the context of, care workers, just being able to get the services that they are eligible for, both, in the Medicaid and non-Medicaid, insurance pockets. It's just a difficult landscape to navigate. And then that's just the healthcare side. Then you look at, let's say, the education, you look at Social Security, you look at all of these other systems. And then you look at local community-based organizations and how they may or may not connect with local governments and agencies. It's all of the systems are operating within their own little world. And it's a lot to try to learn and figure out, especially when the systems don't play well together. It becomes overwhelming. And more often than not, caregivers come away frustrated and often feeling hopeless or helpless because they run into these barriers and they don't necessarily have the time or resources to be able to fight these systems that are greater than themselves. So it's almost like, hey, can we get a guidebook? Can we, almost like, hey, it would be nice if life came with a guidebook, but being able to have some understanding and then support in navigating these systems and ensuring that the systems are serving them in the ways that they were meant to as well.
Hmm. My last question is what can be done to support, those caregivers that often like don't know what to do, and especially like you said, if the system is not adequately built for those people, like how do we sort of help them out throughout, their journey of caregiving?
Empowerment. And that goes for both the caregiver and the care recipient. Providing education, providing validation and connection with other caregivers can be one of the most powerful experiences. And that's, my own experience. That's also the experience that I have heard from so many other caregivers who have just had these aha moments of, they didn't realize that they were a caregiver. And that's the first barrier, not knowing that you're a caregiver. Often we just say, oh, well, I'm just a mom. I'm just a wife. I'm just a child. This is me taking care of my loved one. It's my duty. Yes, but and you are also taking on responsibilities that are beyond the role of a family member. You're also, providing medical care or mental health support. You're also managing medications, um, you know, all of the above and more. And so that self-identification factor is one of the biggest challenges caregivers face because once you know that you're a caregiver, then you can start looking for resources, right? If you don't know you're a caregiver, you're not going to know to look for those resources. So really, being able to offer caregivers these opportunities to self-identify. The second being empowerment for that caregiver and for their care recipients, giving them the information that they need to be able to navigate to the best of their ability, but also to be able to connect with others who can share their experiences, um, which has been hugely powerful in my journey. Just being able to know, wow, I'm not alone. It's not just me, and because we often internalize these experiences and go, I'm a bad mom or I'm a bad caregiver, I'm not doing what I need to be doing, I'm failing in some way, shape, or form. There's a lot of guilt and self-doubt that comes along with not having the information and education you need to be able to know, okay, this is what I can do or this is what I may need to do. um, and then also the guilt associated with not knowing how to best support your loved one. That one's a really tricky and tough one, especially I know for in my experience as an autism mama. I want my daughter to, have the best possible life, best quality of life. She is high functioning. And so I also want to empower her. I want her to have self efficacy. I want her to be proud of who she is and not to look at autism as a disability. It's solely a diagnosis, a facet of our identity, but it's also a superpower. So how can we empower our care recipients to be self-advocates and to give them what they need to be able to live a fulfilling life? Um, so truly it comes from awareness and information, because if you are aware and informed, you have been empowered. and then
Mm-hmm.
you can start to take the next step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that's an important point right there. Yeah.